Today I'm going to show you how to build this. This is my flu shots dashboard. As you can see, we've got the percentages here of patients getting flu shots stratified by different categories like age and race, who received flu shots, who did not receive flu shots. You can actually interact with this and see the percentages update by county. And we're going to build this using a combination of SQL and Tableau. I'm super excited to share this with you, so let's get started. This tutorial is going to be split into two halves. The first half of this lesson is purely optional and is focused on building a data extract using SQL. That data extract will then be plugged into Tableau in the second half of the lesson when we build the dashboard. Now, if you don't want to follow the SQL part of this tutorial, I do have a spreadsheet prepared where all of this SQL work is already done. So you could just download that from my website and skip ahead to the Tableau tutorial. But I would highly recommend that you follow the SQL lesson and write some code with me as you go through the tutorial because it's a critical skill to learn if you work in data analytics. So first, let's get set up in SQL. If you happen to follow along with the first 20 minutes of my intro to SQL video, then you are ready to start writing the code for this SQL lesson. Otherwise, if you want to write some code while you watch the tutorial, you should watch that video first where I show you how to install a version of SQL called Postgres, install a tool called pgadmin that interacts with Postgres, how to create SQL tables, and how to import fake patient data into those tables. That video will give you everything you need to get started. You don't need to watch the whole thing, just the first 20 minutes of that video. Once you have all of that set up, come back here to start this SQL lesson. Alright, so we're almost ready. I just want to point out one thing. I have more tables in my database right now than you probably do, because I'm using these other tables for a data analytics course that I'm developing. But we're just going to be using the patients, immunizations, and encounters tables today, which you can download after following that intro to SQL video that I referenced earlier. You can ignore the rest of the tables because I'm not going to be using them in this tutorial. All right, I've done enough talking. Let's write some code. Let's say that a service line manager or a clinician asks for me to build a dashboard that tracks how many patients at our hospital or clinics got flu shots in the year 2022. And what percentage of them have been getting flu shots for that year. And they want to stratify it by age, race, and county. And they also want to look at this overall, like just the overall percentage of patients that received a flu shot in the year 2022. Let's say that they also want to look at a sort of cumulative running number of the flu shots over the course of 2022, month by month. And they also want just the total number of flu shots given in 2022. And they want to look at also a list of the patients that either received a flu shot or have not yet received a flu shot so that they can follow up with those patients to make sure that they get their flu shots. And they specifically require that patients must have been active at our hospital or our clinical system. And what they mean by that is, suppose that a patient used to get treatment in our healthcare system and they moved to a different city or a different state for whatever reason. They might not be able to go to our hospital or our outpatient clinics anymore because they're in a different area with a completely different healthcare system. So for those reasons, we need to kick out the patients that are inactive and retain the patients that are active. So we need to look out for this requirement as well. How do we start with this? Well, let's start by looking at our patients table. So I'm going to pull up patients and just kind of remind myself what we're looking at here. In the patients table, we've got the identification number, birth date, death date. Well, we're probably going to need the birth date because we need to calculate their age. We need to stratify by the age. So if we're going to pull from the patients table, we're at least going to need the age. And I don't see any other area, any other column here that actually gives me a calculated age. So I'm going to pull in this birth date so that I can calculate the age myself. So I'm going to start writing out my statement here. I'm going to say patients as Pat for my alias, just so it's a little bit cleaner as I'm writing this out. Pat.birthdate. I'm going to put a comma here. To prepare for the next column that I'm going to pull in, we need the race. So I'm going to see where we've got our race here and see if it's spelled the same way. Yep, it's just race, pat.race. Next, we need county. So I'm going to look for county. All right, so I do see the county is listed. By the way, this simulated data, all of this is fake data. We have the address, the city, the state, the county. This fictional healthcare system takes place in the state of Massachusetts, so that's why we keep seeing Massachusetts here. But I'm just going to pull in the county, so pat.county. Need to put a dot here and not a comma. Okay, what else do we need? We need the overall count of the patients, and just the fact that we're querying against the patients table is good enough for this one. What else do we need? We also need a list of patients that show whether or not they received the flu shots. And birth date, race, and county isn't enough for us to know which patients did receive the flu shots and which patients did not. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to include their identification number, so pat.id. I'm going to include their first name, so pat first, and then pat.last. So I think we're pretty much good for the columns that we're selecting from the pats table, at least for now. Now, there's a couple steps to this process from here on out. The first thing we need to do is recall that we can do something called a join to pull in data from other tables. We know that we have different tables that we can use this identification number to connect to. For example, in previous videos, we saw there's the immunization table. Let's take a look at what we have in the immunizations table, just to remind ourselves what's there. So select star from immunizations. And you can see that there's lots of information about the seasonal flu vaccine. I know that I can connect to this patient's column here. That's the same thing as this pat ID. This is the primary key on the patients table, and this here is the foreign key, meaning that it refers to a primary key. And what that also means is that the primary and foreign key are the ideal way to join the two tables together. So I'm going to do some type of join at some point to bring this information into this patients table. But remember that if you do a one-to-many join, then there's a good chance that you're going to start to get repeating rows of data. So I don't necessarily want that, because I don't want that to mess up my calculation later on of the percentage of patients getting flu shots. So I'm actually going to do something a little bit different before I initiate this join. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to restrict this query down to just seasonal flu vaccines for 2022. And this is going to be a separate query, which I'm going to join to this query. So I don't think we've talked about this yet. So far, we've only looked at joins from the perspective of joining one table to another table, but you can actually join multiple queries together. And you can do that using what's called either a subquery or a common table expression. I'm going to do a common table expression, and I'll show you what that looks like. But before I do that, let's just prepare our query. I want to set up the immunizations query so that when I join it to my patients query, it's going to be a one-to-one relationship. And by setting it up in that way, we're not going to have any repeating rows of information. If I run the patients table, notice that I have 11,363 records. It's going to stay at 11,363 records. And it's going to stay that way because of the one-to-one relationship. So once I finish writing this query, the patient information is not going to repeat itself twice like we see here. Each patient is only going to show up once to represent the one seasonal flu vaccine that they received in the year 2022. So we're going to restrict this by saying where code equals 5302. I'm saying 5302 because I know that this code identifies this flu vaccine here. This just gives you a number to these vaccinations that the patient is receiving. And I know that 5302 corresponds to the seasonal flu vaccine. So I'm going to say where code equals 5302 and date, and that date must be between two dates. The date will be 2022 01, whoops, I accidentally hit the insert key there, -01-01. And I like to put the actual timestamp here just to make it obvious what time period we're looking at. So January 1st, 2022, and then 2022, 12/31, 23:59. All right, so I'm going to do that to make it very precise. And let's see how that's looking so far. So I run this, I get 8,437 records. There's still a problem with this though. If I were to do a join from this query to this query, I'm still going to get some repeating records. It's still going to be a one-to-many because there are some patients who could actually have multiple flu shots in the year 2022. I don't know why they would do that, but sometimes it happens. So what I need to do is I need to write a group statement so that I pull the earliest date at which they had the flu shot in 2022. So I'm just going to move this down to the next line here. And I'm going to say group by patient. So I'm going to say group by patient. And now I'm going to say min date as earliest flu shot 2022. Next, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this into parentheses. And what that's going to do, once I finish this, I'll explain everything that's going on here. So I'm going to say with flu shot 2022 as, I'm going to take this, I'm going to paste this here. And now what's happening here is I've created a common table expression. So if I run this, I can see the results of my query here. I can see that we've got all these patients here and the earliest time that they got a flu shot. Okay. And this is a separate query that I'm later going to pull into this query with a join. And when I join this patient identification number on this ID here, this patient identification number, it's going to do a one-to-one join so that we don't get repeating rows. So I'm going to do that now. So now I'm going to say left join flu shot 2022 as flu on pat.id equals flu.patient. Now before I actually run this, let me just take a count here to make sure that we have 11,363 records. What happens once I run this whole block? And keep in mind that when you're about to execute code, you have to include the common table expressions and the final query. So I'm going to run this, and I have 11,363 records. So what that means is that I don't have repeating rows once I do this join because it's now one-to-one. So in case this isn't clear, let me kind of walk you through what's happening here. This is sort of like a temporary holding place for data. You can almost think of it like another table, except this is more temporary. It's just common table expressions only exist in the moment that you run this query, which we can then use in this query. So we're using this query and we're referencing another query. If that doesn't make sense so far, don't worry too much. The more you practice with it, the more it will make sense. Just know that we took this query here, we're taking all of the patients and the earliest time that they got the flu shot in 2022, and we're left joining that against the patients table. And if I were to add a column here and I said flu.patient, just to see if some of those records are getting pulled in, let's run this again and see what happens. You can see now that after we do our join, some of these come through and some of them do not. The ones that don't come through mean that the patient did not have a flu shot. Okay, we have a patient over here in the patients table, but no record corresponding to that patient from the flu shot query because they didn't have a flu shot. So that's why I used a left join here so that we could see who did get the flu shot and who didn't. Null rows are going to be very helpful in helping me identify who did not receive the flu shot, and that will later help us calculate the percentage of patients that received the flu shot. Now, I'm actually going to pull this column from this common table expression rather than this patient column. I'm going to say earliest flu shot 2022 so that we can actually see the date that they received that flu shot, if they received it at all. And that will help us with these sort of time series graphs that we create later on in the Tableau part of this project. I'm going to add one more row, and it's going to be a case statement. So I'm going to say case when flu.patient is not null, then 1 else 0. I'm going to move this down here, and as flu shot 2022. I'm just going to temporarily add the flu.patient column just to explain how this is working really quickly. If I look at this row and this row, what's happening is we're getting a 1 or a 0. The case statement is saying if flu.patient, which is this column here, if that is not null, then give this a 1. And otherwise, it's going to be a 0 because the opposite of not being null is null. So it's going to say if this has something in it, give it a 1. Otherwise, give it a 0. What that's going to do is it's going to give us this binary field that's going to help us quickly add up the number of patients that actually did get the flu shot in 2022. And it will also allow us to really quickly take percentages as well when we're manipulating this data in Tableau. All right, so we're almost done here. There's just one other component to this. Let's look at our objectives here. We've got the age and the race and the overall and the county. We should be able to get these two things in Tableau by doing some special calculations with our data. We have the patient's name and their age. We haven't really paid attention yet to this requirement, though, that the patients must have been active at our hospital. What does that mean? Let's think about that for a second. What we need to do is we need to kick out those patients that we suspect are no longer active at our hospital. The first thing to think about is that not all the patients in our patients table are going to be alive. If I were to look at the patient table again, so I write select star from patient, and I look at that, or sorry, patients, I should say, patients. Some of these patients are unfortunately dead, okay? And obviously if they're dead, they can't get the flu anymore, they're dead, so they don't need a flu shot, and we don't want to track them. So we're going to want to kick out patients who are dead, and another way that we can think about this is we want to make sure that the patients that are in our query are also patients that have not recently moved away and have thus stopped seeing us at our hospital or our outpatient clinics. So a reasonable approximation that you might be able to use here is you could say, well, if we have had an encounter where the patient was there within the last 2 or 3 years, then maybe that's active enough to consider the patient active. All right, let's take a look at the encounters table. So if I run this and I just take a sneak peek at what we've got in here, we have the ID of the encounter, we have the ID of the patient, so this labels out who our patients are. We can see when the encounter started and stopped. What we could do is we could prepare another common table expression, and then in our where clause in our final query, we could say, all right, we're narrowing down in our common table expression to just patients who have had an encounter in the last couple of years. And we just select the distinct patient identification numbers and we say where the patient identification number is in that common table expression. So I'm going to lay out what that's going to look like, and then hopefully this will make more sense as I go through. I don't want to join encounters to my final query and set up this requirement in the join, or because I risk getting a bunch of mini records into the one record for the patients in this query. So I don't want to have a one-to-many situation where I might risk duplicating some of my rows. So I'm going to set up another common table expression to force another one-to-one relationship rather than a one-to-many situation. So I'm going to add another common table expression up here, and I'm going to say with active patients as. And one thing to keep in mind when you're using common table expressions like these is that once you've declared the first common table expression, this is going to use the language with. All of the common table expressions that come after the first one do not have the word with. It's just the name of the common table expression and then as, and they have to be separated by commas except for the last one. With active patients as, I'm going to say select patient from encounters as E. I'm actually going to do a join here to the patients table on, and I know that the patients column in the encounters table is going to refer to the ID column in the patients table. It's another primary and foreign key connection. I'm going to say e.patient equals pat.id, where start between some date and some other date. And that must be 2022-01-01, 2022-12-31. I'm going to again use the precise time point here. And another reason why I do that is because if I were to just put this date here, that defaults to 00 hours or midnight. So we would be missing an entire day here. So I like to put out the entire time period here so that it's more obvious. You could do 2023-01-01. It's just a matter of personal preference. I'm just going to do 2022-12-31, 23-59. And another condition is that the death date on the patients table, so pat.death date is null. Actually, there's no underscore there. Let's run this and see if it's working so far. Looks like I have a comma here, so I need to erase that to get it to work. Okay, so far that's working. Now, one more thing that I'm going to have us do is I'm going to restrict this active patient common table expression so that we're only looking at patients who are aged 6 months and older. I didn't actually mention this in the objectives and requirements part of this scenario. Keep in mind though that the guideline is that patients who are 6 months and older should be receiving the flu shot every year. That's the recommended practice. So we need to take the birth date that is contained within the patient's table, and we need to somehow create an age out of that. So I'll show you how to do that next. I'm going to create another condition here, and I'm going to say age. I'm going to say age 2022 12/31. So what age were they on the very final day of 2022? That's going to be our endpoint. The start point is going to be pat.birthdate. And what that's going to do is it's going to give us the years and months and days old that that patient is, but we only want the years. So to get the years out of that specific output, I'm going to put extract. I guess it doesn't matter if this is uppercase or lowercase, but extract month from all of this. And it has to be greater than or equal to 6. Let's see if that's working. I run that, and now I have my active patients. These are my patients who are not dead, so they're still alive. They must have had a encounter sometime in the year 2022. And they must have been greater than or equal to 6 months old. I'm actually going to change this from being just the year 2022 all the way to 2020. Okay, it's going to start on 2020 and then it's going to end on 2022, defining the period where the patients are active. Just because maybe patients in the year 2022 were busy, maybe they didn't get a chance to go to the hospital. Let's expand that window of time so that we're looking at more patients for our active patients cohort. All right, so this common table expression is defined and this common table expression is defined. Now we just need to take this common table expression and somehow feed it into this final query. So to wrap things up, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say where 1 = 1 is just my placeholder, and pat.id in. And now what I'm going to do here is I'm going to use what's called a subquery. So what this is doing is we've got a query here and we've got another query here. And I'm going to say select patient from active patients. So pulling this all together, what this part is going to do is it's going to say, look at this query first and look at the patients table. We're going to say that the patient identification number must be in whatever we return from this query. And that query is going to point to this common table expression. So it's going to say, all right, I must filter down to just the patients in the patients table that correspond to the patients in this query. So it's one query referencing another query up here in this common table expression. And it's going to restrict our results down to the patients who had some encounters since 2020 all the way up through 2022 that are still alive, and as of the end of 2022 were at least 6 months old. So that's what that part is doing right here. So we take all of this and we run this query. Oh, something's not right here. Oh, I see. I need to put my underscore here. Now I run this. Now it's working. All right. And now you'll notice that this has dropped. Before it was around 11,000 records. Now it's dropped because we're using this where clause. We're restricting to just our active patients. One thing that I forgot is I forgot to add a distinct here. So there could be patients showing up multiple times. So I'm going to write distinct here to see what would happen. So I run distinct, and now I've got 4,927 records. I should not have any more records than 4,927. In fact, I should have exactly that number because I'm requiring that my patients table only correspond to these patients. So if I run this, what do I get? I get 4,927 records. So this lines up with this, and when we do this flu shots joined to it, it still doesn't increase the number of rows because we're only getting one flu shot potentially for each one patient. And if there isn't a flu shot there, if they don't have a flu shot, then they get a null and a 0 here. So hopefully all of that makes sense. I think we're at a point now where we can start plugging that into Tableau. And I encourage you to pick apart this query. I'm going to have all this code on GitHub, so I'll post the link down below. And you can just copy and paste that into the SQL relational database management system that you're using, and you can pick it apart and study how it works. That's the best way to learn if you don't at first understand how things are working. Before we start the Tableau tutorial, I'm going to need to show you a few different ways in which you can plug this data into Tableau. So for the first way, this is assuming that you're using Tableau Public, which is the free edition of Tableau. Unfortunately, Tableau Public does not enable SQL connectivity, so you can only use that if you have a more advanced version of Tableau, like Tableau Desktop, which you would probably have through your work. And also, if you have the Tableau Desktop and you want to connect with SQL, then you also have to have something called an ODBC connection, which enables you to interact with your database using different pieces of software like Tableau or Excel or something like that. So first I'm going to show you the Tableau Public way of doing things. So I'm just going to take my SQL query. I'm just going to click this download button, and it's just going to download my results. I'll just call this something. I'll call this immunizations demo, and I'll just save that wherever. All right. And so that's going to be a CSV file that we're going to connect to. So next, I'm going to pull up Tableau Public. I'm going to connect to a text file. I'm going to pull this immunizations demo file that I just downloaded from PG admin. And that's it. Now we've got all of our data here. So I'm just going to click on sheet 1, and then we can start pulling in all the data that we need. If you're using Tableau Desktop, and provided that you have a connection to your database, like an ODBC connection, you can plug this data directly into Tableau using what's called custom SQL. So I'll show you that. If I select all of this and then I bring up my Tableau desktop, got a very old version here, so it might look a little bit different, but I'm going to go to Postgres SQL Server, and I'm going to type in all of my information here. My server is just called localhost. My database is called Postgres, and then my username and password is just Postgres, and then I got to type in my password. I type that, and then I'm going to go to my custom SQL over here. I plug that in, preview the results just to make sure it's working. And it's as simple as that. Then I would just go to my worksheet and just click on some of these columns and I see it's ready to go here. Again, this is a very old version of Tableau. It's going to look a lot more updated than this. And if I were to go back to the data source area here, there's going to be a lot more options in newer versions of Tableau than you see here. But just keep in mind that there's probably going to be this custom SQL option, and that's where you would plug in your SQL code if you're using Tableau Desktop and you have a live connection to your server. So if you decided to skip past the SQL part of this tutorial and just move straight into the Tableau, what you're going to need to do is download a spreadsheet that I have on my website, and we're going to need to plug that into Tableau. Otherwise, if you're joining me from the SQL part of this tutorial, then you're already good to go and you can ignore this step. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull up datawizardry.academy. So here we're at the datawizardry.academy webpage. Now keep in mind that I might be experimenting with this website in the future. I'm doing this recording early August 2023, and this might look different in the next couple months or the next year. Just keep in mind that you're looking for a free course that says SQL plus Tableau Flu Shots Project or something similar to that. So I'm going to click this one, and then I'm going to click on this button here. You click on that, and then you're going to enter in your information to set up an account with my website. I might send you emails from time to time just updating you about my upcoming Healthcare Analytics Accelerator course. I'll also be giving you some handy tips and tricks on how to navigate data analytics as a career and helpful tips on getting you a job in the healthcare industry. If you're not interested in that, you can just unsubscribe at any time. Once you have set up your account, what you're going to do is you're going to look for the CSV file that looks like this, Immunization Tutorial Version 2 CSV. We're going to download that, and then I'm just going to connect to that using Tableau Public. So I've got Tableau Public open. I'm going to click Text File. I'm going to go to my downloads. I'm going to access this one right here. I'm going to open that up. I'm going to go to Worksheet, and now we're ready to go. All right, so to kick things off, what I'm going to have you do is I want you to go straight to Color, and I want you to go to More Colors. And we're going to save some custom colors here. I already experimented with the various color schemes, and I've narrowed it down to 4 different colors. So I'm going to have you type in, I'm just looking at my notes here, 5C5A74. I want you to drag this over here. Next, I'm going to enter in 2B3048. We're going to drag that over here. I want you to type in 005F9C. We're going to drag that over here. I want you to type in 57ECB2. Drag that over here. I'm going to have those HTML codes in the description, so you can just copy and paste that if you want to. So click OK, and then we'll have all of these colors saved, and we can just apply them pretty quickly when we set up our dashboard. So click OK. First thing I'm going to have us do is I want us to create a sort of bar graph that stratifies the flu shot compliance by age. So we're going to see the percentage of patients in our healthcare system that had a flu shot, and we're going to have a dark bar filling a bar beneath that, and it's going to look like this. I'm kind of cheating here because I already built this in advance, but I'm going to walk through the steps of how I built everything. First thing we're going to do is we're going to build out our age range. So we have a column that looks at the patient's age, but we need to create some bins for the age. So I'm going to go to this little arrow here, and I'm going to create a calculated field. we're going to do a sort of logical statement that's going to crosswalk every age to an age grouping. Let me show you what I mean by that. If age, we're going to put this in square brackets, if age, actually I guess I need to do it like that. If age is greater than or equal to 0 and age is less than or equal to 17, then 0 through 17. Okay, so it's going to look for the age. If it's between the ages of 0 and 17, it's going to label it as 0 through 17. Then I need to put else if square bracket age greater than or equal to 18 and age is less than or equal to 34, then 0 through 34. I'm just going to copy this down again and repeat this a couple more times, but with different numbers. Actually, this needs to be 18 through 34. That would be 35 through 49, 50 through 64. So that's 50 through 64, 50 through 64. And then finally, 65 and up, then 65 plus. Then we'll say end. All right, so our age range is now complete. So what this does is it looks at the patient's age, and depending on what range it falls into, it just assigns a label to that age range. And that's going to come in handy for our graph. I'm going to put the age range up here for now. I'm going to call this flu shots by age. Next, I'm going to create a column. I'm just going to put a 1 here. And what this is going to do is it's going to create a column in Tableau that's just going to automatically label out each row under this column, just a 1. 1, 1, 1, 1, 1. It's going to count the number of rows in that column in our data set. It'll come in handy when we want to count out the total number of patients in our data set, and it's also going to lend itself to this visual, as we'll see in a second here. I'm going to drag number of records here. I'm going to right click and I'm going to select average. This isn't the most intuitive thing in the world that I'm doing, but what I'm doing is I'm saying take the average of that column that we just created where there's a 1 in every single row under that column. When you take the average of 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, it's just going to be 1. And so it's forcing this to start creating these bars that are always going to go up to 1 for each age range. And then I'm going to fill in those bars with a percentage of patients that actually had their flu shots. Now, before I overlay the actual percentage of patients that got their flu shots, I want to explain something. I could go here and I could create a calculated field that calculates the percentage of patients that got their flu shots. And I might do that by taking my flu shot 2022 column. My flu shot 2022 column is just a binary column that gives you a 1 if the patient had a flu shot and a 0 if the patient did not have a flu shot. So there's two ways that I can come up with a percentage. I could sum up flu shot 2022. It's just going to sum up all of the ones where the patient did get a flu shot, and then we would have the total number of patients that got a flu shot in the numerator, and then we could divide that by the count of the patients in the denominator. That's one way I could do it, and I could call this percent of flu shot 2022 is what I'll call this for now. But if you look at this, this is basically just the average of this column right here. So I will prove that this is the exact same thing as the average. So if I apply this and then I go here, we can see that I've created these new bars here. This is 92%. And I'm just going to format these really quickly. If I right click here and I go to format and then I go to percentage and then I control click here and drag this over to label, I'm going to make that a little bit darker. So I go here, right click on this, format, percentage. So now you can see the patients in each age range that got the flu shot. If I were to go back to this thing here and I were to edit this, and I were to say, just take the average now, and I remove this, and I apply that, it's still the exact same. So I just wanted to point that out. When you have a binary column that you're working with in a data set, you can just take the average if you want to see the percentages for that column. I'm going to pull this out. I'm going to delete this because I don't need it. I'm going to take flu shot 2022, and I'm just going to take the average of this one. Then I'm going to do a dual axis. So I'm going to right click here, dual axis. I'm going to go to all. I'm going to click bar. And now you can see this is really starting to take shape, but it looks a little weird right now. I'm going to fill in the colors here to something that looks a little bit better. First, I'm going to right click on the actual visualization. I'm going to right click maybe right here. And then you want to go to this paint bucket here, go to worksheet, and I'm going to pick more colors, and I'm going to pick a sort of night theme for this. And this looks really bad right now. It'll look better, I promise. I'm going to go to color here. I'm going to go to edit colors, and now I'm going to pick the color that I want for this one and this one. For this one, I'm going to pick this mint colored thing that we created earlier. And for this one, I'm going to pick this blue color here. Show you what that looks like. Now it's looking a little bit better, but we still have all this distracting stuff here that we don't really need. And I also don't see my title here that I created earlier. So let's click on that. Let's make this white and bold and Tableau medium. I'll apply that. We can mess with that a little bit later on. I'm going to right click here and remove the header. I'm going to right click here and I'm going to format this, and I'm going to make the header a little bit easier to see by making it bold and then also making this white. I also going to put Tableau medium here. Let's stretch this out a little bit by hovering the cursor over this bottom little white thin line here. I'm going to drag that out. I'm going to drag it a little bit more. That's decent for now. I'm going to blow this up a little bit more, actually. Maybe this will be like 15. That looks a lot better. We still got a lot of weird axis lines here that are just kind of really distracting, so I'm going to get rid of that next. So right click in the space over here, format again. I want you to go to this grid here, click this, so click none. For the column divider, click none. And when you've clicked on this, you're going to go to columns, and we're going to remove the grid lines. And we still have this 0 line here that you can see that isn't really helpful. While I'm still under the columns tab, I'm going to go to 0 lines and then click none. And there we go. So now the grid lines are removed. The next thing I want to do is I want to label out the percentages directly on these bars so that we know how much of this mint bar is getting filled up. So notice that we've got these two shelves here. There's this one and then there's this one. Basically, the percentage is being controlled by this column right here. I'm going to expand this one. So I click on that, and then I'm going to hold down the control key, and I'm going to left click and then drag this to label and see how that looks. Now I'm going to move that to the center by clicking on this label here, and then click that, click that. We don't want this greenish color here, so I'm going to click on this 3 ellipses here, and I'm going to make this maybe 12, white, bold, Tableau medium, apply that. And it's still in a weird decimal format. I don't like that, so I'm going to right click on this, format, and what that's going to do is it's going to allow me to format this from a decimal point to a percentage format. So click on this numbers, percentage. We're going to reduce this down to 1 decimal point. And there we go. Now that we've created a lot of the formatting for this graph, now I'm going to duplicate this, but first I'll just call this flu shots by age. Now we can right click, duplicate, and I'm going to say flu shots by race. And all we need to do now is I'm going to pull race here. I'm going to pull out the age range. And so now we've got the same type of graph, but now we have it by race. I'm going to say flu shots by race here. Let's make this a little bit more visible. I'm going to right click, format. I'm going to make this maybe 15, let's start with 15. Bold, Tableau medium, let's make that white. Let's expand this out a little bit more. And again, we can play with this later to make sure that the bars are the right size. Now, one thing you may have noticed is that after we created our graphs, we see that there are these bars. This one says 93.8%, but it looks like it's filling this up as if it were 100%. And if you look at this one, we also see that for this bar here. Why is that? Well, I'm going to right click on this. I'm going to say show header. I'm going to right click on this. I'm going to say show header. Notice that these axes are actually misaligned. So what we need to do to fix that is I'm going to right click on this top one and I'm going to synchronize the axis. And now these are lined up. We basically have two different axes here. There's one controlling the blue bar, this dark blue bar, and there's another one controlling this mint bar here. So we just need to line those up to make sure that it allows us to see this percentage filling up that bar accurately. So now we can right click and say don't show the header. And we're going to go here and we're going to do the same thing to align these bars. So right click, show header, right click, show header, right click here, synchronize the axis, and now that is fixed. So we can right click again and then hide that header, right click here, and then hide that header. By the way, as we're building this, it's a really good idea to try to save your progress to Tableau Public. The Tableau Public application is a little weird because you can't really save it to your desktop or to your local computer. You have to save it to Tableau Public. So I like to save my progress as I'm going along, just in case my computer just suddenly crashed or the power went out or some crazy thing like that. So I would just go to File, Save to Tableau Public As, and then I'll call this like Immunization Dashboard. I'll save that. Next thing I want us to do is to build a map that's going to list out the counties that patients live and what percentage of them have the flu shots. So I'm going to click on this icon to create a new sheet. I'll call this flu shot percentage by county. I'm going to drag county here. I'm going to take my flu shot 2022. I'm going to drag it here, right click, make that an average. I'm going to drag that over here now. And then I'm going to click on my map icon over here under the show me. And just like magic, it just gives me this map here. Go ahead and right click on this thing here. This is the percentage of patients that got a flu shot and sort of driving the gradient here. And so right click on that, go to Format, go to this numbers section here. We're going to convert that to a percentage with 1 decimal place so that it looks better on the tooltip. And for this tooltip, we'll go here, and this is going to allow us to see what the percentage is for each county. So I'm going to erase this. I'm going to say percent of patients receiving flu shot. Click OK. So now it looks a little bit more clear what that's referring to. I think this map looks a little plain, so I'm going to fill it in with some more details here just so that you have more context when you're looking at it. So go to this map section here and go to background layers. I'm going to switch this to streets. All right, so this is looking good. Let's move on to our next visualization. I'm going to click here. In this visualization, what we'll do is we'll build out a list of patients that either did or did not receive the flu shot. So we have that information available to us if we wanted to try and reach out to that individual and try and convince them to get their flu shot for 2022. Now, to create that patient list, what I'm going to do is I could use like a first name and a last name here. I don't really like the way it looks though. I'm just going to concatenate the two columns together into one column, and I'll show you what that looks like. So let's click here and create a calculated field. I'm going to use square brackets, first name plus last name. I'll call this full name, and I'm going to actually add a third thing to add to the first name and last name, but it's going to be in the middle. And I'm going to put a space here so that the first and last name aren't just like one word. It's going to be separated by a space. All right, so I apply that. I'm going to pull full name into the rows here. And the only other thing to keep in mind is that you might have multiple patients with the same name. You might have two, I don't know how you pronounce this, Adelaide Goodwin, or you might have two Adela Alvarez. So if you want to ensure that you don't have like multiple patients hidden under one of these full names, you could put ID here. I'm going to click Add All Members so that it uniquely identifies every single patient here, even if they have the same full name. Now we have this really ugly identification number for this column here. So you can just right click on that and unclick Show Header. And they're still going to be uniquely identified now. You just won't see that ugly identification number now. Let's call this flu shots list. I'm going to right click here, Format. I'm going to go to this paint bucket. I'm going to go to Sheet, and then I will click on More Colors. Let's click this one. This looks pretty ugly right now, so I'm going to clean this up a little bit. Let's go to the rows here, and we're going to play around with the row banding. Go to Header, and then go to More Colors, and we're going to pick this color here. Next, we're going to right click again, go back to Format. We're going to go to this font here, go to Sheet, go here, and we're going to make this bold, and we're going to make it white and use Tableau Medium. Now go up here to full name and just right click and hide field labels for rows, because that's pretty self-explanatory that this is the name. I also want to add in the age for the patient, so go to the age column, not the age range, but just the age column. We'll drag that over here, and we're going to right click and we're going to make that a dimension. And then we're also going to right click and we're going to click discrete. I messed up my row formatting, so I'm going to right click on this again, go to Format, go to the paint bucket, and we're going to adjust the level so that goes from here to here. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to start playing around with this column here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put in the binary flu shot column that gives me a 1 if the patient did get a shot, or a 0 if they did not get a flu shot. That's the flu shot 2022 column, so I'm just going to drag that over here. And so we can see the 0 and the 1 now. I don't necessarily want the 0s and 1s to show up here. So instead of making this thing text-based, I'm going to drag it to color to change it to the color instead. So now the color is telling me whether or not they got a flu shot. I'm going to play around with these colors a little bit more by going to Color, go to Edit Colors. I'm going to make this discrete instead. I don't want it to be continuous because we only have 0 or 1. So actually let's make this stepped color 2 steps. And then I'm going to click on this palette. I'm going to go to Custom Diverging. So that will give me the option to enable 2 different colors here. On the left side, I will pick this color, and on the right side, I will pick this color. Actually, I got that in reverse, so I'm just going to click this reverse button here. So now what this is doing is it's saying, if it's filled like this, if it has like a darker blue color, then the patient got a flu shot. And if it's minty colored like this, then they did not get the flu shot. Let's go back up here and make this white and bold, Tableau Medium. So now we can see the header a lot better for this visualization. Now we're getting very close. We just have 3 more visualizations to build and then just some final formatting at the end. I'm going to create 2 badges. So the first badge, I'll call this Total Compliance. What I'm going to do for this one is I'm just going to take the flu shot. I'm going to drag it here. I'm going to right click on that. And I'm going to say Average, and then drag this back over here. I'm going to right click on this, Format, and we'll click on this numbers thing here. Make sure you're under the Pane tab. We're going to say percentage, 1 decimal point. What that's telling us is out of our whole patient set of all the patients that we're pulling into Tableau, what percentage of them actually got the flu shot in 2022. Go to the this marks drop down. I'm going to go to square, and I'm going to blow this up a little bit. I'm going to click on label. I'm going to make this centered here. And it's a little frustrating because it's so tiny, but try and get to this point here where you see these bi-directional arrows. Drag it out like this. Drag this one out like that. And then that box starts to get a little bit bigger. Drag that out even more. And then we can play with this later, but there we go. It's nice and big. We're going to actually hide this because we're going to label out total compliance within the box. To do that, go to Label, and then go to these three dots here, this ellipses. Hit the Enter key, and then I'll say total compliance percentage, and then move that to the left. Actually, go back to the label, click on the ellipses again, and remove that because I don't think we really need it. And I'm going to blow this up to be like 15, size 15, bold, Tableau medium. And there we go. We're going to create another one of these, but we're going to create a slightly different metric for that. Before we do that though, just right click on this, go to Format, go to the Paint bucket, Worksheet, More Colors, and then we're going to fill this in with a darker color just so that it blends in with the rest of the dashboard that we're going to be creating here. So now you can right click on this and duplicate it. We're going to call this one Flu Shots Given. And for this one, I'm going to put flu shots here on this T, and I'm going to pull this one out. That's going to show us the total number of flu shots that we're given. I'm going to click on Label so we can play around with this wording here. So click on the label, go here. This is too dark, so I'm going to make this white. I'll say total flu shots given. There's still an awkward spacing here, so let's try and work with that here. I'm going to just backspace, like right here. I'm going to backspace to move this up. That looks better. Now that one's done. So the last worksheet that we're going to build is going to be the most complicated, so bear with me here. But what we want to do is we want to have sort of like a running graph that counts up the cumulative number of patients getting flu shots month by month in the year 2022. Here's what that graph is going to look like. We have this mint colored section, and what that represents is the total number of patients in our data set, whether or not they got the flu shot. So the more that this slice fills up that mint, the better. This slice here, this area graph that's dark blue or navy blue, that represents the number of patients cumulatively that are getting the flu shots. So in January 2022, there were 233 patients that got the flu shot. In the next month, the reason why we see 528 is because we had around 300 more people getting the flu shot. This isn't 528 people that got the flu shot in February, it's the cumulative sum. So 233 in January plus around 300 in February, running the total up to 528. And then the next month you had almost 500 more patients getting flu shots, driving the total up to around 1,000. So it's going to give you the cumulative number of patients getting the flu shots month by month. So we're going to build each of those layers out separately. So to understand how this works, first I'm going to kind of pick this apart a little bit. To create this square, what we need to do is I'll show you what happens if I hover over each of these data points. We need to create a calculation that gives us a column that just gives us a repeating number for every row. It's just going to give us the quantity of patients in our data set. Okay, we just need to repeat that for every row. And by repeating that number, we're going to be able to create this square here. That's going to allow us to build a square using this area. Otherwise, it would look like a line like this. And because we have it in the area, it gives you this square shape here. Hopefully that makes sense. If it doesn't, don't worry. This is kind of a more complicated graph that took me a while to put together. So I'm back to my workbook here, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new worksheet to build this running cumulative count of patients getting their flu shots. So I'm going to say running sum of flu shots 2022, running sum of flu shots 2022. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a calculation. So I'll click here, go to create calculated field. And if this doesn't make sense, don't worry too much about it, but this is going to be a level of detail calculation, which is a little more complicated in Tableau. I'm going to say fixed sum, and then number of need to use square brackets here, number of records, or you could use the count of the flu shot 2022. Either column is going to work here. A final number of patients is what I'll call this. All right, so I'm going to apply this. I'm going to drag this over to this section here, and then I'm going to pull up the earliest shot 2022, and then I'm going to convert that to a month. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to click area. So that gives us this box that we were wanting to build. So let me explain what this is doing. We just built a formula that is going into our data set. This fixed thing, what it does is it says, ignore whatever filters we might have active in our data and just independently look up the total number of records in our database. Number of records, recall that that's just I'll show you what that is. That's just this number 1 in this calculation, number of records. And the number 1 repeated in every single row. So we have this calculation now, and it's summing up every single row in our data set. And this fixed thing is bypassing any filter that we have in our visualization here. So ultimately what that's going to do is it's going to pull up the total number of patients in our data set, and that's 4,927. And if I were to highlight all of these points here, we saw this earlier, but it's just going to give us 4,927, 4,927, 4,927. It's just going to repeat it constantly. And we need that to create the square shape here. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to right click on this, go to Format, I'm going to go to the Paint Bucket, Worksheet, More Colors. I'm going to pick that dark blue color that we've been using. I'm going to close out of that, and then I'm going to go to Color, and I'm going to pick that minty color that we've been using to fill this up. I'm going to adjust the opacity so that it's completely opaque. The months are pretty hard to see, so I'm going to right click on that, Format, and then I'm going to make this bold, white, Tableau medium. Maybe I'll make this like 12. And then I'm going to go to dates, and then I'm going to scroll down, custom. I'm going to type MMM-YY. And what that's going to do is it's going to abbreviate our months and years here. And we don't need this month of earliest flu shot 2022 because it's already obvious what this is doing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to right click, edit the axis. I'm going to get rid of this title here. All right, so that's gone. So next thing I want us to do is I want us to get rid of these grid lines here. So we're going to right click, go to Format, go to this line box here, this lines. And then for rows, we're going to go to grid lines, then click None. And then go to columns, click on axis rulers. That's going to get rid of this axis ruler, but that didn't get rid of our 0 line here though. So we're going to go to Sheet, remove the 0 lines. That takes care of that. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to right click here, Format. I'm going to blow this up a little bit more. I'm going to make it a little bit larger, make it 12, bold, Tableau medium. We're going to make it white so it pops out a little bit more. And we're going to give this a title up here so that we don't even need this to be labeled. So go ahead and right click here, edit axis. We're going to remove this title here. So now what we need to do is we need to create a area graph that gets layered on top of this that counts off the cumulative number of patients getting their flu shots. So to do that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the flu shot 2022. I'm going to drag it here for now. I'm going to right click, and I'm going to do a quick table calculation. And I'm going to say running total. Let's see how that looks when I drag that over here. All right, so that's looking good. That's actually giving me exactly what I want, but it's not layered on top yet. So I'm going to have to right click, do dual axis. Now it's looking a little bit more like we would want it to look, but the axes aren't synchronized. So I'm gonna right click here, synchronize that axis. Now I can hide that header. Colors are still weird, so I'm going to go to the color here, edit colors, and I'm going to give this square in the background that mint color again. So double click here, go to this, double click here, pick this color here, I'm going to apply, and there we go. So now this is looking better and it's starting to take form, but there's still these white lines up here and here and here that I'm not too crazy about. So let's see if we can do something about that. I'm going to right click here, I'm going to go to Format, and first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go to this Borders button here, go down to Row Divider and click None. We're in the Rows tab here. Next, go to Columns and click None for the column divider in the pane section here. And I still want a white line to show up for this one. So to add that in, I'm going to go to this Lines button. I'm going to go to Rows, and then I'm going to put white for the axis rulers. And that's looking pretty good. Let's click here, and I'm going to make this white and bold. Running sum of flu shots 2022. Perfect. We now have every single ingredient we need to start building our dashboard. So I'm going to click here on the new dashboard. I'm going to click on size and pick fixed size. I'm going to click on generic desktop. That's my favorite. I'll go to dashboard, format, and then we'll pick that same color we've been using, this dark blue color here, this navy blue. So now let's just start dragging things onto our dashboard. First, I'm going to give this a simple title, so I'll go down to text. I'll drag that over here, and I'm going to call this Data Wizardry Flu Shots 2022, and I'll say Data Wizardry Healthcare System or something like that. And I'll make this white so it's easier to see, and I'll also blow this up to like 18 bold. Tableau medium. See how that looks? All right, so that's looking decent. Now I'm going to put the flu shots by age right underneath that, and I'm going to put flu shots by race over here. You can get rid of this. This thing is going to keep popping up, so when it keeps popping up, just close out of it. We'll add it later. I'm going to move this up a little bit like that. All right, so now that those are added, I'm going to right click on this, edit alias, and I'm going to capitalize each of these so that it looks better. So I'll do that, Hawaiian, native, so I'll capitalize the N, go to other, edit alias, right click, edit alias, capitalize W. All right, so that's looking better. I'm going to click on dashboard again. I'm going to pull in the flu shots by county. I'll put that here. I'll pull in the running sum of flu shots right over here. Again, we're going to close out of this because I don't want that right now. Left click here. I'm going to make this white, bold, Tableau medium. Apply that. That's looking good. Drag that up a little bit, drag that up a little bit. We don't need this unknown here, so I'm just going to say filter data to make that disappear, and I'm going to click here and I'm going to say filter data. And we're still missing the flu shots list. I'm going to go over here, pull that in right there, and this thing pops up again, so I'm going to delete that. I'm going to drag this over a little bit. I'm going to drag this over a little bit so that we get more room for our flu shots list here. That looks better. We still need those badges that we created up here, so make sure you're on the dashboard tab, go to total compliance, pull that one over here. I'm going to pull flu shots given over here, and these are being pushed down because there's a title here that we can't see. We're just going to right click, hide title, right click, hide title, and I'm going to left click here, and I'm going to go to fit entire view. I'm going to go here, fit entire view. And one other thing that I want to do with this is I want to put some images next to them so that it looks a little bit more sharp. So I'm going to go to canva.com and I'm going to pick out some icons that I really like to plug those in next to each of these. So I'm on canva.com, and if you haven't created an account on canva.com before, it is an amazing website. They have tons of designs that you can work with for free, or you could get access to a lot more by getting a pro account. And personally, I have a pro account, but there's lots of stuff that you can get for free on here. I'm just going to go to create a design. I'm going to go to logo, and I'm going to pick out a couple of icons that I really like. And I'm going to go to elements here. I'll search for vaccine, and I'll see what they've got here. I like this one, so I'm just going to pull this in. It looks like maybe this is a free one. And the way that I can tell that it's free is if it doesn't have this crown icon where it says pro. This one doesn't have that, so it should be free. I'm going to use my HTML color that I've been using pretty consistently in my dashboard. So to plug in the color that you want, I'm going to go to color, and I'm going to go to add new color. I'm going to type in my HTML code, and that was 57ECB2. So that's the one that we want. I'm going to add another icon here. I'm going to look for virus, see what we get for virus. I like this one, so I'm just going to use that, and I already plugged in my color here, so I'm just going to use this recent one that it has already remembered. I'm going to kind of center that a little bit. You should see like these crosshairs appear once you've gotten something centered. It doesn't want to show up for me though. There we go. There's the centering. So now that those are ready to go, I'm going to go to the share button. I'll go to download. I'm going to say transparent background, and then I'm going to download that. And once you've got that, you can click on that, and you have to unzip this somewhere or just take the contents and put them somewhere else. I'm just going to put these on my desktop here, so I'll just do that really quick. So here's my icons. I've saved them. Now I'm going to plug them into Tableau. All right, so I've got my icons downloaded. I'm going to go to image, and I'm going to drag an image here. And I'm going to choose my icon. That was downloads and PNG1. I'll apply that, fit and center. So there we go. That one looks good. I'm going to drag this over a little bit. I'm going to squeeze this in a little bit more. And then I'm going to plug in my other image. So I'll go to image here. I'll drag that over here. I'm going to choose my other image, fit and center, apply. And it's up to you to just kind of play with the spacing so that it looks exactly how you like. But I'm satisfied with, well, let's play with that a little bit more. That's looking pretty good. I think that looks good right there. I'll maybe squeeze this up a little bit more. All right, so this is looking fantastic. Last thing we need to do, and then we're totally done, is we need to play with the tooltips. So we already adjusted this tooltip here. These ones are not necessarily tooltips that we need because it's already pretty self-explanatory. So I'm going to click on this, go to this arrow, go to Sheet, and then I'm going to go to my tooltip. Actually, I'm going to go to the All, Tooltip, Show Tooltips. I'm going to click off of that. I'm going to go here, Tooltip. That one's already deselected. Tooltip, that one's deselected. Great. So I'm going to move to Flu Shots by Race. I'm going to go to All, Tooltip, unclick Show Tooltips. Make sure that that also applies to these other axes here. All right, so that's good. Let's go back to our dashboard. So no tooltips here. These ones don't need tooltips, so I'm just going to click on this, go to Sheet, Tooltip, uncheck the Show Tooltips, go to this next one, go to Tooltip, click Show Tooltips to unshow it. go back to the dashboard. I'm going to look at this one here. This one is also not self-explanatory, so I'm going to modify this one. So click here, go to Sheet, Tooltip, and then I'm going to say running sum or cumulative flu shots by month. Apply that. One last really picky thing I have is that these shades of blue are not the same shade of blue as these shades of blue. So I'm going to click here to go to Sheet, and because I think I picked the wrong color here, I'm going to go to More Colors, and I'm going to select this blue. All right, so go there, go back to Dashboard, and we go here, go to Sheet, Color, More Colors, this blue. There we go. I just remembered that there are a few last minute, very quick steps we need to do. After that, I swear we will be done. All right. So you remember that legend that kept popping up really annoyingly? We're going to actually add that in now. So click here, go to Legends, Color Legends. I'm going to bring this in like right over here, actually. And then I'll drag this up. I'll drag this up, drag this up a little bit more, drag that up a little bit more, and maybe I'll bring this up more and this up more. I'm going to make this fit the entire view, make this fit the entire view. All right, so that looks good. And I'm going to just edit this. I'm going to format the alias here. I'm going to say no shot given for the mint color. And then for this one, I'll right click here on the average flu shot 2022, and I'll rename this on the edit alias option to shot given. All right. Okay, so then that's done. Now what I want to do is I want to enable a sort of dynamic selection here when we click on these counties. To do that, that's really easy. You just left click here, and then you make sure that this funnel thing is actually filled. And then once you do that, that's going to give us this dynamic interaction with the dashboard. But notice that this thing starts to behave weirdly. We barely see any of those patients getting the flu shots for that county because this is still stuck at 5K. So to make sure that when we click on this county and then this thing updates to show the total number of patients from this county, what we need to do is we need to go back into this. So go here, go to Sheet, and then right click on Action County. And then we're going to say Add to Context, and then go back to the dashboard. And then once we do that, it's going to now factor in the total number of patients per county, so that adjusts accordingly. And now we are done. So excited that you could complete this whole dashboard with me. I hope that you enjoyed this tutorial as much as I enjoyed developing it. I'm going to have so much more content in the future, including a free 1-hour Tableau course that is in the works. So stay tuned for that. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in another video.